Wounded alien general shocked after being rescued by humans, the stars blinked coldly in the void of space, distant and indifferent. General Cardle's flagship drifted, a battered giant among the debris of his shattered fleet. Smoke curled from its hull, and warning lights flickered in chaotic patterns across the bridge. Alarms screamed intermittently, cutting through the hum of the failing engines. For a creature as disciplined and proud as Cardle, the chaos was unbearable. He gritted his mandibles, pain lancing through his side where the energy blast had struck. His vision blurred, but he refused to collapse. The battle had been swift and merciless. An enemy ambush, unexpected and precise, had torn his forces apart. Cardle had commanded fleets for decades, and yet in the blink of an eye the enemy had struck where he was weakest. Ships that once gleamed with the pride of his command now floated in silence, their hulls twisted and burning, their crews lost to the void. He had never imagined such defeat, and the sting of failure burned more sharply than the physical pain. He looked out through the cracked observation window. The stars seemed to mock him, distant points of light indifferent to the suffering below. Cardle's mind raced. Every strategy he had considered, every maneuver had been anticipated by the enemy. It was a trap, and he had walked into it. His pride, his honor, and his life were all at stake, and now he was alone. The control panel emitted a low, urgent beep. His escape pod had launched automatically when the flagship's core breached. Cardle barely had the strength to move, dragging himself from the bridge to the small shuttle. The pod shuddered violently as he climbed inside, the pain in his side screaming in protest. He collapsed onto the hard seat, closing his eyes for a moment. "I will survive," he muttered to himself, the words more a vow than a promise. His species had survived countless wars, countless enemies. He had survived too. He would endure this. The pod lurched into the empty void, away from the battlefield. The hum of its engine was weak, a faint whisper against the vast silence of space. Cardle's vision swam with pain and exhaustion. His mind wandered, thinking of the soldiers he had lost, the ships destroyed. He had always believed in strength, in strategy, in discipline. And yet all of it had failed him here. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed meaningless in the emptiness of space. Cardle drifted between consciousness and oblivion, memories of the battle flashing in his mind. He could hear the cries of his soldiers, smell the burning fuel and scorched metal, feel the trembling of the ship as energy beams cut through the fleet. Every moment was a reminder of defeat, a reminder that even a general of his caliber could fall. Then a signal interrupted the darkness. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet distinct. Cardle squinted at the control panel, trying to make sense of it. It was not the automated distress calls of his own fleet. No. This signal was different, structured, intelligent, and deliberate. He frowned, suspicion burning through his pain. It did not belong to the enemy. He would have recognized their transmissions anywhere. Whoever this was, it had found him in the void, alone and vulnerable. Cardle's mandibles twitched, half in pain, half in warning. He could not afford to trust, not now. The pod shuddered again as the source of the signal approached. Outside, a sleek ship appeared, gliding through space with an elegance unfamiliar to Cardle. Its design was unlike any he had seen before, compact, efficient, and surprisingly robust. Its hull gleamed faintly in the starlight, unscathed and almost serene amidst the destruction surrounding him. Cardle's instincts screamed. This could be a trap, a ploy to end him before he could recover. Yet the ship did not attack. It slowed, matching the pod's trajectory with uncanny precision. A panel opened, revealing a docking mechanism. Cardle's instincts were divided between caution and curiosity. He was a warrior, trained for war, yet the idea of being rescued by an unknown species was inconceivable. He activated the pod's communications array, attempting to send a warning or demand. The voice that responded was calm, measured, and strange. Its tones carried no threat, only concern. "We have detected a vessel in distress. Assistance is being provided. Please remain calm." Cardle's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The words were alien, yes, but their meaning was clear. This species, the humans as they would later identify themselves, were offering help. No deception, no immediate threat, just aid. Aid offered freely without demand or leverage. Cardle's pride bristled. A general of his standing was never rescued. One was always expected to survive or perish on one's own. And yet here they were, reaching out, risking themselves for someone they had no reason to care for. The docking was swift, almost elegant. The pod slid into the larger ship's bay, secured by mechanical arms that moved with precision and speed. Cardle felt the pod's walls relax as the humans stabilized it. They moved quickly, efficiently, yet gently. Medical scanners hummed over his body, assessing injuries. Devices he could not identify administered treatments that brought immediate relief to the worst of his pain. Cardle remained rigid, his pride warring with the undeniable comfort spreading through his body. He watched them work, analyzing, repairing, and healing, and could not help but notice their methodical efficiency. Every action had purpose, every gesture calculated for the best outcome. And yet, beneath the precision, there was empathy. These humans, fragile by appearance, unarmed by nature, acted with care and respect for a creature they could have easily left to die. Hours passed as Cardle slowly regained strength. The initial shock of the rescue gave way to a cautious observation. He studied the humans in silence, noting their teamwork, their discipline, and the way they communicated with one another. There was no arrogance, no attempt to assert dominance over him, yet there was authority in their actions. Every human on the ship had a role, yet none relied solely on rank to enforce obedience. The general's curiosity grew despite his better judgment. He had expected fear, opportunism, or greed. Instead, he saw bravery, intelligence, and compassion intertwined. It was unnerving. For centuries, Cardle had relied on hierarchy, fear, and discipline to command respect. And yet these humans commanded it in a completely different way, through action, competence, and morality. Cardle's thoughts wandered to the battlefield he had escaped. His fleet was destroyed. Entire legions of his people had fallen. Yet here he was, alive and owed entirely to these humans. The realization was uncomfortable, even humiliating. Pride, he knew, had no place here. Survival did. Observation, understanding, and perhaps even trust. The humans spoke occasionally, slowly, ensuring their words were understood. They asked questions not with interrogation but with curiosity. "What is your name? Where are you from? Are you hurt?" Cardle's tongue hesitated over replies, unused to such direct yet gentle inquiry. When he finally responded, it was measured, cautious. He did not yet trust them, but he could not deny the effectiveness of their care. Days passed aboard the ship. Cardle's body healed, and his mind, though restless, began to process what had occurred. He studied human behavior, learning their patterns, their routines, their strengths and weaknesses. He witnessed them repairing ships, analyzing data, coordinating navigation, and engaging in what he initially dismissed as mundane tasks. Yet each action carried purpose, each decision carried insight. Slowly, Cardle's perception of humans began to shift. Where he had expected weakness, he saw resilience. Where he had expected chaos, he saw order. Where he had expected cruelty, he saw compassion. These were not just beings capable of survival, they were beings capable of greatness. The very idea was disorienting. Even as he marveled, Cardle's warrior instincts remained. He observed the ship's defenses, the placement of weapons, the security protocols. He watched human pilots train, noting their precision and adaptability. He realized that in their unity, creativity, and bravery, these humans possessed a strength that rivaled, and in some ways exceeded, that of his own species. Yet Cardle's pride was a constant companion. He would never admit openly that humans had impressed him. He remained aloof, reserved, and cautious. Trust, he knew, was earned, not given freely. Still, in the quiet of his recovery, when the pain of battle and injury allowed him reflection, he could not ignore the truth. Humans were extraordinary. And as the ship sailed silently through the void, carrying him away from the battlefield, Cardle faced a realization that unsettled him more than any wound. Survival, strategy, and honor were not the sole measures of strength. Compassion, ingenuity, and the willingness to act for others without expectation of reward were equally formidable. For the first time in his life, a general had been rescued not by allies bound by duty, nor by his own cunning, but by beings he had considered insignificant. And yet in their hands he had survived. Cardle closed his eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over him. He was alive. He was safe. And the galaxy, he realized, was far larger and stranger than he had ever imagined. The humans had changed something in him, something profound. And though he did not yet understand it fully, he knew the encounter would shape his future, and perhaps the future of his people, in ways he could not yet foresee. For now he rested, watched over by beings he neither trusted fully nor dismissed. For the first time in countless cycles, Cardle felt a cautious spark of hope amid the vast darkness of space. The soft hum of the human ship was steady, comforting in a way Cardle could not have imagined. He had expected the constant alerts and alarms of a military vessel, the harsh discipline and rigid commands that had defined his life. Yet here, in this strange ship, there was order without oppression, purpose without fear. He watched quietly from his recovery room, his gaze tracking the humans as they moved about their tasks with precision and care. He had been awake for several cycles now. His wounds, once searing and raw, had healed remarkably under their attention. The humans had used tools and medicines that were alien even to him, yet they worked as if they had been doing it for centuries. Each time a human technician entered the room, they spoke in careful tones, explaining what they were doing and why. Cardle had expected deception or exploitation, yet there was none. Their actions were sincere. Curiosity began to overtake his caution. He observed how they communicated with one another, no displays of rank or threat, but a clear understanding of responsibility. They seemed to value every individual, each member contributing to a greater whole. Cardle's mind, trained in hierarchy and authority, found it difficult to reconcile this with the efficiency he was witnessing. A human engineer approached his bed, holding a small device. "Your vitals are stabilizing," she said in their language. "We will continue monitoring, but you should be able to move around soon." Cardle inclined his head slightly, the closest he would allow to acknowledgement. He did not trust them entirely, not yet, but he recognized the effectiveness of their care. Every movement, every word seemed designed to maintain stability, not control. It was foreign, yet undeniably strong. As the cycles passed, Cardle began to leave his recovery room under careful supervision. The first time he walked through the corridors, he noticed how humans worked together. They repaired systems, analyzed data, and coordinated ship operations seamlessly. There was no shouting, no enforcing of rank through fear. Instructions were given clearly, and they were followed with precision because the humans respected the work, not because they feared punishment. It was a concept Cardle had never encountered in his species. Loyalty was always bought with fear or honor, obedience enforced through discipline or threat of death. And yet, here it was, voluntary, effective, and somehow stronger than the rigid structures he had always relied upon. He followed a small group to the observation deck. From there, he could see the void of space stretching endlessly, dotted with distant stars and planets. One human pointed toward a nearby system. "We are monitoring nearby sectors," they explained. "We stay aware of potential threats, but we prioritize safety and exploration." Cardle's mandibles twitched. They spoke of caution, of awareness, yet without the paranoia that had ruled his own command. There was confidence in their words, a balance between vigilance and action. He could not help but admire it, even as his pride bristled at the idea of admiring humans at all. Days turned into cycles. Cardle spent his time observing, learning, and slowly recovering. He watched the humans navigate the ship through asteroid fields with skill and precision. He watched their pilots train tirelessly, performing maneuvers that required both creativity and coordination. He watched engineers solve problems that would have stumped even the most advanced alien technicians he had commanded. Yet it was not just their skill that fascinated him. It was their courage, their willingness to act even when danger was present. When a minor emergency occurred, a small breach in a hull section, humans moved quickly, some unarmed, some risking personal safety to repair the damage and ensure the safety of others. They did not hesitate, they did not complain, and they did not seek recognition. Cardle had never seen such selflessness in his military career. One evening, he found himself in a quiet corridor with a human medic. She was examining data on a handheld device, analyzing the efficiency of their medical systems. Cardle studied her movements. "You do not fear mistakes?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. She looked at him, surprised. "Mistakes happen," she replied simply. "We prepare, we plan, but we act. Fear does not guide us, understanding does." The statement struck him more than he expected. In his species, fear was always present, a tool used to maintain order and control. Here, it was absent. Instead, humans relied on intelligence, preparation, and cooperation. Cardle felt a flicker of respect, though he would not admit it aloud. As he continued to recover, Cardle began to question his own methods. His fleet had been destroyed not because of weakness, but because his strategies had been predictable, constrained by the rigid doctrines he had followed all his life. Humans, by contrast, adapted quickly, thought creatively, and valued every individual's contribution. Perhaps, he considered silently, this was the true strength of their species. The human captain visited him one cycle, a tall figure with calm eyes and a steady presence. "You are recovering well," the captain said. "When you are ready, we would like to understand more about the conflict you were involved in. Your knowledge could help prevent further loss of life." Cardle bristled slightly at the suggestion, but he did not respond with anger. The humans were not demanding, only requesting. It was a subtle but important difference. Over time, he realized that these beings operated on principles he had never understood fully, principles of cooperation, intelligence, and moral responsibility. During one routine inspection of the ship systems, Cardle witnessed a human engineer resolve a critical power fluctuation. The engineer coordinated with others, offering guidance while simultaneously monitoring multiple systems. Cardle noted how they trusted each other implicitly, yet each individual was accountable for their own actions. The balance of independence and cooperation was unlike anything he had experienced. He also observed their training exercises. Humans simulated combat scenarios, coordinating without rigid hierarchy. Ideas flowed freely, adjustments were made in real time, and success depended on flexibility and creativity rather than obedience alone. Cardle realized that their strength was not in numbers or firepower, but in their ability to think, adapt, and act collectively. One evening, Cardle was left alone on the observation deck, watching the stars drift past. He reflected on the events that had brought him here, the ambush, the loss of his fleet, and the unexpected rescue. He felt a strange mixture of gratitude and discomfort. Gratitude, because they had saved his life when all else seemed lost. Discomfort, because their actions challenged everything he had believed about strength, leadership, and survival. For centuries, he had believed that power and fear were the ultimate measures of strength. Humans had shown him otherwise. They were capable of incredible courage, intelligence, and compassion, qualities that no amount of firepower or strategy alone could achieve. During the next cycle, Cardle began tentative interactions with the humans. He asked questions about their technology, their methods, and their society. He was careful not to reveal too much about himself or his species, but he was equally careful to observe and learn. The humans answered openly, explaining their reasoning and processes. There was a sincerity in their responses that disarmed even his guarded mind. Through these interactions, Cardle began to understand the humans' philosophy. They valued life, intelligence, and moral responsibility above conquest or domination. They sought to explore, to understand, and to improve, not just for themselves, but for the greater good. Cardle had never encountered such principles in his military career. As cycles passed, he found himself thinking more about the implications of their philosophy. If such principles could guide a species, perhaps war and destruction could be avoided in ways he had never considered. Perhaps strength was not solely in force, but in the ability to act wisely, morally, and cooperatively. Even as he reflected, Cardle remained a warrior. He observed, he calculated, he learned. He would not abandon his instincts or training, but he realized they were incomplete without understanding, compassion, and adaptability. Humans had shown him a new dimension of power, one that combined courage, intelligence, and morality in ways his species had overlooked for centuries. One quiet cycle, a young human approached him, holding a data pad. "We have mapped nearby sectors," the human said. "There are still conflicts ongoing. We will avoid them, but your knowledge could help." Cardle nodded slightly. He understood the importance of cooperation. Perhaps, he considered, survival was not merely about force, but about alliances, understanding, and the ability to learn from others. He felt a flicker of something he had not expected: hope. For the first time since the ambush, Cardle allowed himself to believe that his survival might mean more than just living through one battle. Perhaps it meant the chance to change, to learn, and to grow stronger in ways he had never imagined. And as he watched the humans move about their duties with calm efficiency, he realized that they had not only saved his life, they had expanded the possibilities of what it meant to be truly strong. Cardle remained quiet that evening, watching the stars drift past the observation window. He thought of his fleet, of the battles he had fought, and of the species he had always believed superior. Yet now, he saw the truth reflected in the humans around him. Strength was not measured solely by firepower or rank. It was measured by courage, intelligence, compassion, and the ability to act wisely in the face of adversity. And in that quiet moment, as the human ship glided silently through the void, Cardle felt a subtle shift within himself. The war he had fought, the pride he had clung to, and the doctrines he had followed were no longer the only path. A new understanding had taken root, one that would shape his actions, his strategies, and perhaps the future of his people. The humans had rescued him, yes, but in doing so, they had also opened his eyes to a broader vision of strength, survival, and morality. And for General Cardle, that realization was more valuable than any victory he had ever known. Cardle had recovered enough to leave the infirmary, though his movements were still careful and measured. The humans allowed him freedom within certain limits, and he observed them closely as he walked through the ship. Their behavior fascinated him. They were disciplined, yes, but not rigid. They planned carefully, but adapted quickly when things went wrong. They communicated clearly, but there was room for debate and discussion. Cardle, who had always relied on strict orders and unquestioned loyalty, found it both unnerving and impressive. The first real test of his patience came in the training bay. The humans were conducting a simulation exercise, recreating a hostile boarding scenario. Cardle had insisted on watching, claiming it was important to understand their capabilities. Yet the moment he stepped in, he realized how different their approach was. The humans did not follow a strict chain of command. Instead, Each participant seemed to anticipate the other's movements, adjusting their actions in real time. There were no sharp orders, no punishment for mistakes, just fluid, coordinated action. Cardle's mandibles clicked in irritation. How could such unstructured methods be effective? And yet, as the simulation progressed, he had to admit the results were astonishing. The humans moved as one, covering vulnerabilities and anticipating threats without hesitation. He had trained countless soldiers in rigid formations, yet these humans were faster, smarter, and more adaptive. It was humbling. He approached one of the instructors, a middle-aged human with calm eyes and an easy posture. "Your formations, they are chaotic," Cardle said, his voice low and precise. "There is no structure, no strict chain of command. How do you achieve efficiency?" The human smiled faintly. "We rely on communication, trust, and understanding. Everyone knows their role, but they also know the roles of others. We adapt as the situation changes. Structure is important, but flexibility is stronger." Cardle considered this silently. Flexibility, adaptability, collaboration, concepts he had never prioritized. He had built his reputation on discipline, obedience, and fear. And yet, he could not deny the effectiveness of these humans. Over the next cycles, Cardle began to interact more with the crew. At first, he did so out of curiosity, watching their methods and analyzing their decisions. But soon, he found himself drawn into discussions, offering suggestions and tactical advice. The humans listened politely, even when his ideas challenged theirs, and they responded with reasoned explanations rather than dismissive authority. It was a level of respect he had rarely experienced from peers or subordinates alike. One day, during a maintenance check, Cardle observed a group of humans working to repair a damaged propulsion unit. The task was complex, requiring coordination, problem-solving, and precise timing. Several attempts failed, and minor errors caused setbacks. Yet no one grew angry or despondent. Instead, they communicated calmly, corrected mistakes, and tried again. Cardle felt a flicker of admiration. He had seen countless alien engineers succumb to panic or arrogance under similar pressure. Humans persisted with patience and determination. Curiosity led him to speak with one of the engineers. "You do not seem afraid of failure," he remarked. "In my experience, fear is necessary to drive success." The engineer shook her head. "Fear can guide, but it can also blind. Understanding, focus, and collaboration, these guide us better than fear. We learn from mistakes, adapt, and keep moving forward." Cardle chewed on her words, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The human's approach challenged everything he had been taught. Discipline, fear, and hierarchy had been the foundation of his life and career. Yet here was a species that achieved far more without them. Tensions arose, however, as Cardle attempted to offer advice during training exercises. Some humans resisted politely but firmly, explaining their methods and reasoning. The general's pride bristled. He had always been a leader, respected and feared. Here, his authority was secondary to cooperation and mutual respect. It was frustrating. One evening, he stood on the observation deck, watching the stars drift past, and reflected on his situation. He was a warrior, trained for battle, accustomed to command and control. Yet the humans operated on principles he could scarcely grasp: collaboration, empathy, moral responsibility. Their strength did not come from fear or hierarchy, but from unity and intelligence. He could not ignore it, no matter how much his pride resisted. Despite his inner conflict, Cardle began to apply some of what he had learned. He offered tactical suggestions during simulations, blending his aggressive strategies with the humans' flexible approach. Slowly, the results improved. He realized that combining his military experience with their methods could be a powerful force. It was a humbling revelation, but one he could not deny. The real test came when the ship's sensors detected a hostile fleet approaching a nearby system. The humans moved quickly, assessing the threat and preparing defensive maneuvers. Cardle felt a familiar tension rising. War was in the air, and instinct demanded action. He offered his analysis, proposing a strategy that combined his understanding of enemy tactics with the humans' adaptable methods. The humans considered his advice carefully, then integrated it into their plan. Cardle observed with cautious interest as they executed the maneuvers. Ships darted and weaved, coordinated precisely, adapting to every change in the enemy's approach. It was unlike anything he had commanded. He felt a mix of awe and disbelief. During the engagement, a human pilot executed a risky maneuver to draw enemy fire away from a vulnerable vessel. Cardle's instincts screamed at him to intervene, to order a safer approach. Yet he watched as the pilot's skill and courage paid off, saving the ship and its crew. It was a lesson in trust, adaptability, and bravery that Cardle would not forget. After the engagement, the captain debriefed the crew. Cardle remained quiet, absorbing the discussions, analyzing the humans' decision-making process. He realized that their strength lay not in individual skill alone, but in their ability to act collectively, to trust one another, and to prioritize the mission over ego. He also saw something he had rarely witnessed in his own species: moral judgment. The humans considered the consequences of their actions, not just the immediate tactical advantage. They weighed lives, ethics, and long-term outcomes alongside strategy. It was a dimension of warfare and leadership that had never been part of Cardle's understanding. As the days passed, Cardle began to integrate more with the crew. He shared knowledge of alien tactics and strategy, and in return, learned from the humans' methods. They debated, discussed, and collaborated, challenging his assumptions and expanding his understanding. Slowly, he felt his pride shift from rigid superiority to a cautious respect. He also began to reflect on his own species' failures. The rigid hierarchies, obsession with power, and reliance on fear had led to his fleet's destruction. In contrast, the humans' combination of intelligence, courage, adaptability, and morality had allowed a smaller, outnumbered force to succeed. It was a lesson he could not ignore. One evening, as the ship glided through the darkness of space, Cardle stood alone on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly, indifferent witnesses to his thoughts. He considered the humans, their actions, their philosophy, and their strength. He realized that his initial shock and distrust had given way to understanding, even admiration. Yet he remained cautious. Trust, for a warrior like Cardle, was not given lightly. He would observe, learn, and test the humans further, but the seeds of respect had been planted. He saw now that strength was not solely about domination, fear, or strategy. It was about intelligence, courage, collaboration, and morality. The humans had challenged his beliefs, expanded his understanding, and forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about power. And for Cardle, the implications were profound. He was a general, trained for battle, yet he now faced a new battlefield, one of ideas, principles, and understanding. As he watched the stars, Cardle felt a quiet determination. He would learn from these humans, integrate their methods with his own experience, and use this knowledge to survive, and perhaps to lead his species in a way that could prevent future disasters. The journey was far from over, and challenges lay ahead. But for the first time since the ambush, Cardle felt a cautious sense of hope. He would return to his people, stronger, wiser, and with a vision that went beyond mere conquest. And when that time came, the humans who had saved him would have shaped not only his future but the future of an entire species. The human ship moved steadily through the quiet void, scanning nearby sectors for any sign of danger. Cardle's senses were on high alert. Although he had spent cycles recovering and learning from the humans, the instincts of a warrior could not be turned off. He paced the observation deck, studying the star patterns and nearby signals, ever aware that danger could appear without warning. It did not take long. The ship's sensors registered multiple hostile vessels approaching from the edge of the sector. Cardle's mandibles clicked sharply. These were remnants of the fleet that had ambushed his forces, scavengers seeking to eliminate survivors. His mind raced, calculating odds, strategies, and escape possibilities. He felt the familiar tension of command rising, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and adrenaline. The human captain called a meeting in the operations room. Cardle joined, standing slightly apart from the others, observing as the humans coordinated quickly. Crew members moved to stations, running simulations and analyzing the approaching ships. Cardle noticed the calm efficiency of their actions. There was no panic, no confusion, only focus and coordination. "We are outnumbered," the captain said plainly, "but we have a plan. We will engage to protect ourselves, and we will minimize casualties wherever possible." Cardle studied the star maps and tactical displays. He could see the humans approach, defensive positions interspersed with mobile units, strategic diversions, and escape routes prepared in advance. It was unlike any military formation he had used in his career, yet the logic was clear. Flexibility, anticipation, and cooperation were their strength. "I can help," Cardle said, his voice calm but firm. "I know the enemy tactics. Their formations are predictable, but they adjust quickly if they face new strategies. I can guide some maneuvers to exploit weaknesses." The captain regarded him carefully, then nodded. "Your knowledge will be valuable. Work with our tactical team. We will combine your insight with our methods." For the first time since the ambush, Cardle felt the rush of purpose, the focus of a mission that mattered, the chance to act decisively. He moved to the tactical console, coordinating with the humans, giving precise advice on enemy formations and likely targets. They listened attentively, asking questions, testing his assumptions, and integrating his insights with their flexible plans. When the first enemy vessels arrived, the engagement began. Cardle watched as humans executed maneuvers with incredible precision. Ships darted and weaved through asteroid fields, shields flaring against incoming fire. Pilots coordinated without verbal commands, anticipating each other's moves, adjusting in real time. It was a dance of survival and strategy that left Cardle both impressed and humbled. He directed attention to a group of enemy fighters attempting to flank the ship. "Divert the forward batteries to intercept. Keep the drones in formation. Do not break ranks," he instructed. The humans executed his commands seamlessly, adapting instantly to changes as enemy vessels altered their approach. Cardle felt a surge of satisfaction. For once, his knowledge was not only respected, it was effective in combination with a system far superior to what he had ever commanded alone. Amid the chaos, Cardle observed the courage of the humans. Pilots risked direct fire to draw attention away from more vulnerable ships. Engineers moved through hazardous sections of the vessel to repair critical systems, while energy beams and explosions rattled nearby walls. Medical teams worked tirelessly to stabilize injured crew members. There was no hesitation, no complaint, only action, coordinated and purposeful. During a critical moment, one human pilot, a young cadet, maneuvered to block an enemy ship from reaching the central command hub. The vessel was unarmed and fragile, yet the pilot acted decisively, relying on skill, trust, and courage. Cardle's instincts screamed to intervene, to take control, but he resisted. Instead, he watched as the pilot executed perfectly, saving the ship. It was a lesson in bravery, trust, and capability that no theory or simulation could convey. As the battle continued, Cardle began to integrate his own strategies with the humans' approach. He suggested calculated feints, diversions, and traps that exploited the enemy's predictable aggression. The humans adopted these strategies, blending them seamlessly with their flexible, collaborative methods. Together they began to turn the tide, using intelligence, coordination, and courage rather than sheer firepower alone. Hours passed in intense focus. Cardle could feel the strain, the tension, the adrenaline. Yet he was learning at every moment, adapting his thinking to a new style of warfare. He realized that these humans were not just skilled, they were extraordinary. They had taken a situation that would have overwhelmed any traditional alien fleet and managed to respond effectively, not through fear or hierarchy, but through ingenuity, collaboration, and courage. The enemy, frustrated by the unexpected resilience of the human fleet, began to make mistakes. Cardle observed, analyzing each error, directing countermeasures. He realized that the humans' greatest strength lay not only in skill and coordination, but in their moral compass. They did not seek revenge, domination, or glory. They sought to protect, to preserve life, and to act wisely. Even in battle, they measured consequences and weighed actions carefully. By the final stages of the engagement, Cardle had grown to trust the humans completely. He no longer felt the need to control every maneuver, every decision. Instead, he contributed insight where it was valuable and observed the humans act with precision and courage. Together, they outmaneuvered the enemy, forcing them to retreat. The remnants of the hostile fleet fled, leaving the sector in silence once more. After the battle, the crew regrouped. Cardle remained at the tactical console, analyzing the outcomes, noting areas of strength and weakness. The humans conducted their debriefing calmly and efficiently, acknowledging successes and failures without blame. Cardle realized that this approach, honest evaluation without ego or fear, was another key to their effectiveness. The captain approached him after the debriefing. "Your assistance was invaluable," the captain said. "Your knowledge of their tactics combined with our methods made the difference. You adapted quickly and you worked with our crew seamlessly. We are grateful for your guidance." Cardle inclined his head slightly. Pride and humility warred within him. "Your crew's strength is remarkable," he replied. "They act with courage and intelligence in ways I have rarely seen. I am surprised by their capability and by their morality." The captain nodded. "We value life and responsibility, even in war. That is how we survive. That is how we grow stronger without losing ourselves." Cardle considered the words carefully. For centuries, he had believed that survival, power, and fear were the true measures of strength. The humans had demonstrated otherwise. Intelligence, courage, cooperation, and morality were equally powerful, and perhaps even more enduring. In the following cycles, Cardle worked closely with the humans. He shared information about the enemy forces, their strategies, and their likely movements. In return, the humans taught him their methods of coordination, communication, and decision-making. He began to see the value of their principles not just in battle, but in leadership and governance. One quiet cycle, Cardle walked through the observation deck as the human crew moved about the ship. He reflected on the recent battle, the lessons learned, and the growth he had experienced. He realized that the humans had not only saved his life, they had transformed his understanding of strength, strategy, and morality. For the first time in his life, Cardle considered a future beyond mere conquest and survival. He imagined leading his people not with fear or hierarchy, but with intelligence, courage, and ethical guidance. Perhaps his species could survive not just through force, but through understanding, cooperation, and moral responsibility. He paused to watch the stars drift past the observation window. They seemed distant, yet full of possibility. The humans had shown him that even in the vast emptiness of space, life could thrive, morality could endure, and courage could shine. They had demonstrated that true strength was not in domination alone, but in the ability to act wisely, bravely, and for the greater good. Cardle's pride remained, but it had evolved. He no longer viewed humans as weak or inferior. Instead, he respected them, even admired them. and he knew that the lessons he had learned aboard this ship would guide him in the battles to come, both against external threats and within his own people. As the human ship continued its journey, Cardle felt a quiet determination. The enemy forces would regroup, conflicts would arise, and danger would never disappear. Yet he was no longer alone in facing it. He had allies who were brave, intelligent, and morally guided. He had knowledge and experience, combined with the lessons of a species that had shown him a new way of understanding strength. For General Cardle, the battle had changed him as much as it had tested him. He had learned that courage, intelligence, and morality could be as formidable as firepower and strategy. And as he watched the stars stretch endlessly before him, he realized that his survival, and perhaps the future of his species, depended not just on his own actions, but on his ability to embrace these lessons and apply them wisely. The journey was far from over. Enemies remained, challenges awaited, and the galaxy was still vast and unpredictable. Yet for the first time since the ambush that had nearly ended his life, Cardle felt a quiet hope. The humans had saved him, taught him, and shown him a new way to fight, lead, and survive. And that hope, fragile though it was, burned brighter than any star in the void. The battle had passed, leaving the sector quiet once more. Cardle moved through the ship with a steady gait, no longer burdened by the injuries that had first brought him here. The wounds had healed, but the lessons endured far deeper than scars. Every day aboard the human vessel had been a lesson in courage, intelligence, and morality, and Cardle felt them shaping his mind and spirit as much as any weapon or maneuver ever could. The humans continued their work, tending to repairs, analyzing data, and preparing for the next unknown threat. Cardle observed them silently, noting their efficiency and composure. Nothing he had seen in his long career compared to their ability to act decisively, yet with care. He realized with quiet amazement that their strength was not merely in skill or courage, but in the principles guiding their actions. The captain approached him in the observation room, where Cardle often reflected on the stars and the lessons he had learned. "You have changed since your arrival," the captain said gently. "Not only have you recovered, but you have also integrated with our crew. Your perspective is valuable, and your insight has saved lives." Cardle inclined his head, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "You have taught me more than I expected. I believed strength was measured by fear, by power, by the ability to command. You have shown me a different measure. Strength can also be intelligence, cooperation, and morality. Courage is not only in victory, but in protecting others, even when there is risk to oneself." The captain smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of understanding. "We act because it is right, not because it is easy. That is what keeps us alive, and that is what gives meaning to our actions." Cardle's gaze drifted to the stars. He thought of his fleet, of the losses he had endured, and of the pride and arrogance that had once defined him. That pride had not disappeared, but it had transformed. He now understood that power without wisdom, courage without compassion, and strength without ethics could lead to ruin. He had seen it in his own fleet's destruction, and he had seen its opposite in these humans. During the following cycles, the human crew prepared for him to return to his people. The ship had plotted a course to a safe rendezvous point within his territory. Cardle spent time reviewing reports, sharing knowledge and planning strategies that could protect his species while reducing unnecessary loss of life. He had become more than a guest or a survivor. He had become a collaborator, a student, and a partner in a new vision of strength. As the humans conducted their final preparations for his departure, Cardle felt a strange mix of gratitude and uncertainty. He had come to respect them, yet he wondered how his people would receive the lessons he had learned. Could a warrior of his culture, accustomed to hierarchy and dominance, implement methods based on collaboration and moral guidance? Would his people listen, or would they see these ideas as weakness? The human captain approached him once more, placing a hand on the railing beside him. "You will face challenges when you return. But you have the knowledge, the experience, and the perspective to make a difference. Trust yourself in what you have learned." Cardle inclined his head. "I will remember and I will act. Your lessons will not be wasted. I owe my life to your people, and I will ensure that the gift of survival carries meaning for my species." The docking procedures were smooth, and soon Cardle's pod was prepared for the journey home. As he stepped inside, he looked back at the human vessel, the crew moving efficiently through their final tasks. He saw bravery, intelligence, and compassion reflected in every action, and he realized that they had changed him in ways deeper than survival. They had given him insight into what it meant to be truly strong. The pod detached, gliding into the void with a gentle hum. Cardle allowed himself a moment of reflection. He remembered the ambush that had nearly ended his life, the chaos of the battlefield, and the desolation he had felt in the cold emptiness of space. And he remembered the humans, calm, intelligent, brave, and morally guided, who had saved him when all seemed lost. During the journey back to his territory, Cardle contemplated how he would apply what he had learned. He thought of his fleet, the rigid hierarchies, the blind adherence to fear and power. Could he integrate human methods into his command? Could he teach his people that true strength lay not only in firepower and obedience, but in courage, intelligence, and moral judgment? He resolved that he would try, not because it would be easy, but because it was necessary. The galaxy was vast and unpredictable, and survival required more than brute force. It required understanding, adaptability, and compassion. Cardle understood now that a species that could act wisely, bravely, and morally could endure far longer than one that relied solely on power. When he arrived at the rendezvous point, scouts from his people approached, cautious and suspicious. Cardle's pod signaled its identity, and he prepared to address his fleet. He expected skepticism, perhaps hostility, yet he stood taller, strengthened not only by recovery, but by the lessons he had learned. As the hatch opened, he was met by familiar faces, soldiers, officers, and subordinates who had survived the ambush or who had been stationed in nearby systems. Cardle observed their wariness and understood their doubt. They had known him as a strict, unyielding leader, and now he returned with ideas shaped by humans, a species many of them had dismissed as weak. He addressed them calmly, clearly, and with conviction. "I have returned with knowledge that will save lives and strengthen our people. Strength is not only in domination or fear. It is also in courage, intelligence, cooperation, and moral responsibility. We can fight smarter, act faster, and preserve our people more effectively if we adopt these principles. Listen, learn, and you will see their value." There was silence at first, then murmurs of curiosity and skepticism. Some were resistant, unwilling to consider alternatives to tradition. Others, however, were intrigued. They had witnessed the destruction of our fleet. They had seen how rigid thinking led to defeat. Cardle spoke not as a man broken by failure, but as a general transformed by understanding. Over the following cycles, Cardle worked with his people, implementing strategies and training that incorporated the lessons he had learned from the humans. Exercises emphasized adaptability, collaboration, and moral judgment alongside traditional tactics. Soldiers learned to trust one another, communicate effectively, and anticipate threats rather than merely follow orders. Cardle observed the results with quiet satisfaction. Efficiency improved, morale rose, and the fleet became more resilient. He began to realize that the humans had given him more than survival. They had given him a vision of leadership and strength that could endure far longer than any weapon or strategy alone. Occasionally, Cardle reflected on the human ship and the crew who had saved him. He remembered their bravery, intelligence, and moral integrity. He thought of the cadet pilot who had risked her life to protect the command hub, of the engineers who had worked tirelessly under fire, and of the captain who had guided him with patience and wisdom. They had shaped him, taught him, and shown him a path that he could now carry forward. One cycle, as the fleet returned to base after a training exercise, Cardle allowed himself a quiet moment alone. He gazed at the stars stretching endlessly above, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect. The humans had saved his life, yes, but they had also saved the potential of his people by teaching him the true meaning of strength. Cardle knew that challenges would continue. Rival factions, hostile fleets, and unpredictable dangers remained in the galaxy, yet he faced them differently now. He was no longer a general bound solely by tradition and fear. He was a leader shaped by understanding, courage, and morality. He carried with him lessons that could prevent unnecessary loss and guide his species toward a stronger, wiser future. When he returned to his private quarters, he reviewed the data and tactical notes collected during his time with the humans. He planned not only for defense, but for growth, adaptation, and collaboration. The galaxy was unpredictable, but with the knowledge he had gained, Cardle believed that his people could endure, thrive, and perhaps even learn from other species in ways that went beyond mere conquest. In the quiet of his quarters, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The ambush, the loss, the pain all had seemed overwhelming, yet it had led him to the humans, who had shown him a path he had never imagined. Their courage, intelligence, and morality had transformed him. They had given him not just survival, but vision. Cardle understood that respect and admiration for the humans would remain with him forever. He would carry their lessons into every decision, every strategy, and every interaction with his people. They had proven that even a small, unassuming species could teach a general of his stature lessons that no textbook, weapon, or battle plan could convey. As the stars shimmered beyond the viewport, Cardle felt a quiet resolve. The humans had not only saved him, they had shown him the true potential of leadership, the real meaning of strength, and the importance of courage, intelligence, and morality. These lessons would guide him as he led his people into the uncertain future. And in that moment, Cardle understood something profound. Survival was not just about living through battles. It was about learning, growing, and applying wisdom to protect life, inspire courage, and guide others toward a better future. The humans had given him that understanding, and he would honor it in everything he did. With determination, pride, and a new vision of leadership, General Cardle looked to the stars once more. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, filled with challenges, opportunities, and unknown wonders. And for the first time since the ambush, he felt not only hope but purpose, a purpose shaped by the humans who had saved him, taught him, and forever changed his understanding of what it truly meant to be strong.